Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us during your lunch hour for the Arizona League of Women Voters annual legislative week. We are delighted you're here this afternoon. We have a very exciting topic, and we plan on a very robust discussion with our league leaders and our experts who are going to lead us through a very important topic for the league, which is women's rights, especially in the area of women's health. The League of Women Voters of Arizona, as is the league, is a nonpartisan organization. It's a political organization, but we neither support nor oppose any candidates. For over decades, the league has been attending and in attendance at the legislature on a specific day, which is our legislative lobby day. With the onset of COVID, we had to pivot rather quickly. And rather than be silent, we decided we would educate our members in the public about important legislative matters that need to be known to our public and that to which we wish to lobby with our legislators. However, we moved from a one-day event to a weekly event, a week-long legislative event, and hosted virtual lunch and learn sessions. This year, we're doing it as a hybrid. On Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and on Friday, we are hosting the lunch and learn. And on Thursday, we will actually be at the Capitol. And so we ask you to join us for the remaining sessions. And we also ask you to join us on Thursday if you're a league member, so that we can show the power of the league in empowering voters and defending democracy. I am Penny Sharan, and I'm the League of Women Voters State Advocacy Chair and the incoming President-elect for the State League. A couple of very simple minor items so that your experience today is both productive and enjoyable. Please mute your microphone. We have done that already. Should you unmute, we ask that you please stay muted. We ask you to post all your questions in the Q&A tool of the Zoom webinar, not in the chat. The Q&A tool is being moderated by Alexis and Jody, and that's how we will know to ensure that the questions are brought forward for all of you to hear and for Bree and other experts to respond to. If there are questions that are unanswered by the time we're done, then we will certainly try to do our best to get an answer and share it with the attendees. Do contact us at LWVAZ@gmail.com if you have questions. Today's session is being recorded and will be made available on YouTube, as was yesterday's session. You will receive a survey at the end of the day asking for your feedback and opinion. And hopefully the recording will be ready so we can send the recording to you. Today's topic is the women's health and rights at the Arizona legislature. Our moderators this morning will be Alexis Glane and Jody Liggett. Today we have speaking to us Bree Thomas, who's the provider and from a provider and advocacy perspective. We anticipate legislator Hernandez to join us, Melody Hernandez, though we have just learned that she may or may not be able to, and I'll have Jody explain that a little bit further. I'd like to begin by introducing Alexis Lane, one of our newest and most active members in the league. Alexis is passionate about this issue and is leading the advocacy issue team for women's rights. If you are interested in being part of the work that we're doing on this front, please be sure to email us at LWVAZadvocacy@gmail.com, and I will put this in the chat. Alexis is a member of the League of Women Voters of Metro Phoenix. She has a BA in Psychology and Human Services and an MA in Legislative Affairs from the George Washington University in DC. She has expertise in trade association congressional affairs. She was a staff for Senator John McCain. She's a mother of two daughters, 9 and 11. And in spite of that busy work, taking care of her daughters, she has given so much time to us in the league. And we are both honored, and she's a gem, and we are so fortunate to have her. I'd like to introduce another gem who's very well known in our community, Jody Liggett. Jody is our professional lobbyist for the League of Women Voters. For the very first year, the League has hired a professional lobbyist because we were able to secure some funding to be able to do that. Just in the short time she's been with us, she has produced such wonderful work, gives testimony at the legislature, and we're delighted to have her expertise and her mentorship to other volunteer lobbyists. We have a good team of volunteer lobbyists who are also doing this work. If you don't know Jody, she got her law degree from Sandra Day O'Connor. She's an ASU graduate. She was in the Arizona House of Representatives as a staffer, I believe, and also worked for Governor Jane Hull. She worked for the Arizona Foundation of Women in Mayor Greg Stanton's office and Mayor Kate Gallego's office. She's currently doing a lot of work with Planned Parenthood and ACWA. I'm going to turn over the program to Judy. Thank you, Judy and Alexis, and thank you so much, Bree Thomas, for joining us in this program. Jody, you're on.
Great. Well, as we mentioned, Representative Melody Hernandez will be joining us. She is our state legislator, one of 3 or 4 who have really worked with our Reproductive Rights and Health Coalition to be a voice for pregnant people at the Arizona legislature, to push back on some of the extreme legislation that we see every year. She's just been a real champion. She has a personal story about reproductive health that she fearlessly shares with the world. It's quite compelling. And she's just been our go-to over the last couple years for reproductive rights. So I look forward to hearing from her. She's actually so engaged at the legislature that she's in a really important conference right now and it's running late. So she may drop in and we'll stop what we're doing and hear from her. But until then, we'll go ahead and move forward. We can go to the next slide, Penny. And Bree Thomas. Bree joins us from the Arizona Family Health Partnership. Bree, I think you and I have known each other in various roles for, I don't know, like 25 years. Master's in Public Administration. We got all devils on this call, I think. That sounds great. Political science degree, undergrad ASU, spent a lot of time in and around state government at the Department of Health Services, the Department of Economic Security, and was part of Governor Janet Napolitano's team. And Bree has just been indispensable in our coalition. I'll let her introduce herself and talk about what the Arizona Family Health Partnership does in a minute, but I wanted you to meet her and she's on our screen. You'll be hearing from her later. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, I'm going to run through quickly just kind of how the League operates when we do advocacy at the national and state level, and what allows us, to take positions on issues other than voting, right? Most people associate the League of Women Voters with voting rights and elections. They do weigh in on other issues because they believe in civic engagement, but there's a process for that. So they don't come at their positions lightly. At a national level, a position for the League of Women Voters purposes, they take action on an issue only if they've developed a position that they have consensus on. This is through a grassroots process. They consult a range of people, make sure the issue is understood by their members, and also they consider the external political environment. Go to the next slide. So the League has 2 positions that really allow us to talk about reproductive rights at the local level. So they have a national position on healthcare reform, which is that every US resident should have access to affordable quality healthcare, including birth control and the privacy to make reproductive choices. They've also got a position on social policy that talks more broadly about equal rights and equal opportunity for all, promoting economic justice and health and safety for all Americans. And we feel like that also covers a lot of the work we do in reproductive rights. Next slide. So here in Arizona, this is the articulated position that is kind of the umbrella for all the work we do on women's health and reproductive health and rights. The League of Women Voters of Arizona believes in the constitutional right of privacy of the individual to make reproductive choices. So that's the point from which we proceed. We go on the next slide. So what does that mean for us here in Arizona? Well, I would say, number one, thank goodness for the League. Thank goodness for the Arizona Family Health Partnership. Thank goodness for Planned Parenthood and NARAL and all the people who work on these issues every day. It's tough in Arizona. You see Texas in the news, you see Mississippi in the news, and you should know across the country, Arizona's in the news too, right up there with them. We have, one of the most aggressive legislatures in terms of regulating abortion. I'll try and move quickly through this because I want our discussion to be the main part of our call today. But one of the things that we look at is, what are they doing with legislation? And this is, these regulations around particular abortion care in Arizona, have been coming over the course of many years, decades, actually. So what we have now is a set of laws, and advocates refer to these as TRAP laws. It's an acronym, Targeted Regulation of Abortion Providers. So it's regulation that on its surface sounds like, hey, it's healthcare. We ought to regulate this. It's surgery. It sounds dangerous. We ought to be doing some things. But these are disingenuous regulations. They're not aimed at health and safety. They're not necessary to further women's health. And just a few examples of what we have right now in Arizona. A mandatory waiting period, which is absolutely medically unnecessary. And in a place as geographically dispersed as Arizona, a waiting period means, now you've got to take a day off work, potentially have to get a ride and go drive many miles. It's putting one obstacle after another in a woman's path. We also have an admitting privileges requirement. A doctor performing an abortion must have admitting privileges at a hospital within, I think, 100 miles from the clinic. That's often difficult for providers to obtain. A doctor admitting privileges aren't really a thing anymore. If you can imagine, like if they took you in an ambulance to a hospital, do they stop you at the door to the emergency room and say, oh, wait, does your doctor have admitting privileges here? That doesn't happen. It's a nonsensical requirement. There's also a requirement to have an ultrasound, which is not medically necessary, and mandatory in-person counseling. So that sounds maybe kind of reasonable, like this is a serious decision, you should probably think about it. But the in-person requirement means that people, again, have to often drive over long distances, take time off work. And by the way, the counseling is a state mandated script that contains a lot of misleading and inaccurate information about abortion care and reproductive health care in general. So that was that was the trend for many years for the pro-life contingent to push regulations of clinics and doctors and to try and reduce the number of people seeking abortions that way. We've had a new wrinkle in the last few years, which are some we call reason bans, like, so you can't get an abortion if it's because of the sex of the unborn, or their race, or most recently, their disability. We believe these are constitutionally flawed. What civilians should understand, people who don't do this every day, this is very disingenuous. The people pushing these laws are not working with the disability community or with communities of color and doing equity work. They're using those communities as a cover to make abortion care out of reach for most people in Arizona. Most recently, we've got a 15-week ban, which can cause problems in seeking care. And then we also have a bill this session, Texas-style and abortion ban that actually empowers individual citizens to kind of turn in their fellow citizens, at least physicians, and be paid $10,000 for that. So it really is a bounty hunter model. Just terrible, and not the way that we should be, trying to reduce the number of abortions if that is our goal. So next slide, please. So you might be wondering, okay, the League of Women Voters advocates on this issue. Are we just talking about abortion all the time? Because that sounds scary and like, we're going to damage the reputation of the League. So the answer is no. It is not abortion 24/7. Some of the folks at the legislature would like it to be about abortion all the time, but the League believes that women, pregnant people should have access to the full range of reproductive health care. So that would mean birth control, right? Prenatal care, Medicaid coverage for postpartum care. We have 2 bills, appropriations bills, that would allow that. Adoption and foster care subsidies, child care subsidies. This starts to get into an area referred to as reproductive justice that addresses poverty and racial inequity. We're not the lead on those things. We have, communities of color and other communities of interest that are the leads on those things. But the League and other groups like it are so valuable because you have members all across the state. All your members vote and they're very active. And they're not the usual suspects. They're not Planned Parenthood volunteers in pink shirts or, scary NARAL people. They're the League of Women Voters. They've been around for 100 years. We trust the League. So they're a great messenger for this area. Next slide. And I think I'm going to wrap it up pretty soon for my portion. We have the next slide, please. Thank you. Yes, I'm wrapping it up. So now I'm going to kick it. I mentioned we're waiting on Representative Hernandez, and she actually might not make it. But I would love to toss it over to Bree Thomas now from the Arizona Family Health Partnership. Bree, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your agency, and what you do, and then just your perspective, like what's going on in Arizona. What do you think about how the coalition's doing? And what do you think about groups like the League, especially, and what do they bring to the table that has been missing before?
Absolutely.
But just that.
That's all. I'll take Melody's time plus a little bit. No. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it. I started this work in 1992 when there was an initiative on the ballot to ban all abortions in the state of Arizona. And at the time, we won that easily. So, I've been in this field for some time now. And I think at the time, the League of Women Voters was actually a partner agency on that initiative work that we did. So it was Planned Parenthood, NARAL, League of Women Voters, Common Cause, I think was the other one. And there might've been a 5th one. So the fact that I could remember 4 of the 5 is brilliant today. So, I've done this work for a long time. And as you've seen, I worked at the legislature. I worked for Governor Napolitano and state agencies. I did a stint at Planned Parenthood, which I think we all do at some time or another, and worked actually as the director of public affairs. And so did some of this work. And in the early 2000s, we were able to actually pass. Yeah, you're right. AAUW was also a partner in that initiative. I just saw that comment. We were able to pass equity in drug prescription. So if you covered Viagra, you would cover birth control pills, because at the time that wasn't really the case. So I have been at this agency. I was on the board of directors for 6 years. It used to be the Arizona Family Planning Council. It's now the Arizona Family Health Partnership. And I think we'll have a new name later this year or in the middle of this year. So look forward to seeing that. But what AFHP is we're the designated Title X agency in Arizona. That means we compete for and are awarded the Title X grant, which is the nation's only family planning dollars. So yes, you can get it through Medicaid, you can get it through the state access plan, but this is the only designated fund just for sexual and reproductive health care. And our purpose is to create a future where everyone has the trust, support, and information they need to choose what's best for them. And that's why we're making sexual and reproductive health care accessible to everyone, no matter who they are or where they come from. AFHP coordinates these Title X services, connecting clients to caring providers, offers inclusive health education, and advocates for evidence-based, I'll repeat that, evidence-based health policy at every level of government. So some of the services that the Title X network provide include confidential sexual and reproductive health care services to primarily low-income, underserved, underinsured, or uninsured individuals and youth. The birth control options include emergency contraception, IUD, condoms, sterilization, and referrals for abortion services. We do STD testing and treatment, cervical cancer and breast cancer screenings, and all of our services are confidential and require no ID or are at no cost based on the income. We have nearly 60 Title X health centers in 11 of Arizona's 15 counties. We serve about 30,000 clients a year. So what you probably heard in the last couple of years, the Title X network across the country underwent a rule change that the Trump administration promulgated and then implemented. And Planned Parenthood, because of those rules, decided not to participate in the Title X system anymore. It's kind of called a domestic gag rule. We were able to make it work for us during the brief time that it happened because the Biden administration has already implemented a new Title X rule. There's some glitches in that there was a court case that Ohio brought to, it's at the circuit court now, the Sixth Circuit, saying that they didn't promulgate the rules correctly. And of course, Attorney General Brnovich signed on to that. So we're in the process of waiting to hear what the outcome of that will be. It could mean some changes for us, but we'll figure it out. And we have a friendly administration that we're able to work with. So generally, Jody, that is what AFHP is and what we do. I've had the pleasure of working with Jody for a number of years, specifically on sexual and reproductive health care at the Arizona legislature. And what I would say is the last 2 years, we have exponentially grown that coalition to do a broader reach, to actually have more diversity in voices talking about sexual and reproductive health, which I think is really important. And then kind of, it's really nice. It's like there's some strategists, there's some bill readers, there's some outreach people, there's communications people. So all of these people are coordinating the efforts, and the League of Women Voters brings a really strong voice to the table for women. And I know you all are voters, so it's always really important to have somebody connect with their elected official and say, I'm a voter in your district. So I think that's what's really important about the League of Women Voters. Did I cover what you needed, Jody, or do you have a question?
Thank you. I think we're going to move to questions. So I'm going to toss it over to my friend Alexis. If you're ready, we can moderate some questions. And Penny, if we go to the next slide, even if nobody's chiming in, we have a whole menu of questions that we think people would like to know.
We have one question, Jody, if you can hear me.
Yes.
One of our listeners would like to know more about some of the good bills that are introduced, some of the good things we have cooking.
That's right. Well, I'm going to ask for a heavy assist here from Bree, so I remember correctly, but in particular, Athena Salmon has dropped 2 bills, and there's an interesting backstory this session with Athena Salmon, who's a great friend to the League and the Coalition. So she has dropped a bill to repeal that ancient, I think 1907 or something statute that originally criminalized providers, women, and advertisers, strangely, of abortion services. And this is going back to pre-statehood days, even this ban. So that's on the books. The part which criminalized women or those seeking an abortion was removed last year, one of the only good things that happened. But those 2 provisions, criminalizing physicians and criminalizing anyone who promotes or refers for abortion, are still on the books. So Athena Salmon's bill would repeal those. So in the event that things go south at the Supreme Court, that Arizona would still be protected and not, overnight criminalize anyone providing an abortion. So that's one really important bill. And then Bree, the other one was a repeal of some of the most egregious. Help me out here.
Was it telehealth? The ability
That's
for
right.
providers to provide telehealth for abortion medication?
That's right. So for the benefit of the audience, we do in our country have access to abortion by pill. One of those TRAP regulations is a requirement, for in-person care. So any other medical provider in Arizona can use telehealth services, and we've all been doing it during the pandemic. This is literally a healthcare provider handing you a pill and telling you what to expect. It absolutely could be handled by telemedicine. This would open up reproductive health care to huge swaths of the state that are currently reproductive health care deserts. And I'm not talking just abortion. It's when those clinics go away, everything goes away. So those are two really important pieces of legislation. I wish they were moving. It's a testament to, the balance of power in our legislature. A lot of what we do right now is damage control, trying to stop the absolute worst. And then, at the end of the day, making sure at least the public understands what is going on at our Capitol. Because we know from polling, and we've done it in our coalition informally and formally, we know that the majority of Arizonans, and this is true across the country, whatever their personal feelings, and they may be ardently pro-life or a Catholic, but the majority, about 80% of Arizonans still think that in terms of the law, that abortion should be legal and that people should have access to abortion, and that the legislature should not be spending its time passing laws to restrict that right. So, everyday people are pretty clear about their values, and they don't feel that government is the appropriate one to step in here.
Only thing I would add, Jody, is the FDA just approved the mifepristone and mifepristol, the abortion pills, to be to be delivered this way. That was approved by the FDA. So even though they approved it, we have this law banning the telehealth portion of it. So I think that's one reason why it's really important.
It's really important.
Jody and Bree, do you have the bill numbers for anyone who'd like to follow those on their own?
I can get them to folks. They are not moving, unfortunately. So they're not likely to be heard, but it's an important discussion point, but we'll put those bill numbers in the chat.
Okay. The only other pieces I would add are that there is a piece of legislation moving around postpartum care for 12 months for those on the Access program. So that is one piece that is moving and I think has a really good chance of being passed this year. And then there's a whole slew of dental care for pregnant women. It'll never happen. We've tried it for 7 years. And comprehensive medically accurate sex ed bills. So people drop really good bills that could move along, but I don't anticipate those moving either.
Yeah, and sorry to be a little downbeat, but that is the reality, and it's just math. And we sometimes when we talk about this, it can sound partisan because it's, Republicans have adopted this position. It's a plank in their party, to end access to abortion. So we're not making it a partisan issue, but that's just kind of the way it maps out. And Republicans have a majority in the House and Senate, and they are obviously control the executive branch. So it's a tough uphill slog, but we do win occasionally at the legislature, and we win a lot in court. Although we're going to turn the corner on that soon.
Well, that makes sense too. Sorry to interrupt, Jody, but what you were saying before, to reiterate that last point on the importance of the league with voter education, voter outreach, because as Bree was saying, the legislators, regardless of party, do care what people in their constituency are saying. So as we have league members across all of the different legislative districts, when votes do come up, it never hurts to be able to have constituents call, despite whatever their party affiliation might be, because stranger things have happened on these different bills where people may be swayed by a groundswell in one direction or another.
It's true. And it's so important for legislators to hear from people in their district. And, significantly, you all on this call are real people. Bree and I are lobbyists and therefore lesser beings at the legislature. Bree, you're actually a provider. I don't think you have lobbyist grunge on you. But it is much more meaningful when constituents, everyday people contact their legislators.
Absolutely. And the 80% factor that you mentioned too, and that's regardless of anyone's religion, that whatever their personal beliefs are, whether they're informed by their own specific place of worship, that they do believe that when it comes to legislating, that those two issues are separate, that people are entitled to make their own choices.
That's absolutely right. I see a question. It's a good one.
Could I just make a comment on that?
Sure.
Bring up, Alexis points out that the 80% is could represent multiple religions, but at the same time, the people who believe in the pro-life movement is also includes people of different faiths. I think it's important for us to acknowledge and recognize it's not associated with one single faith. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that because we did say something about the Catholic religion, but the truth is it is more than that. So we just need to recognize that whatever their faith is, it may drive them in one way or the other. Okay. We have a number of more questions, Alexis, if you don't mind walking through those, or do you want to, can we walk?
We have a question about the ERA, if we want to talk about that and how that impacts the work that's being done.
Well, sure. And, anybody jump in here, but interesting. So the original opposition to the ERA and Phyllis Schlafly, right, was about abortion. She believed correctly, I think, if the ERA passed, abortion would be legal in this country. I think it's an open question. And I don't think it's likely to occur in the near future, but it's absolutely relevant. I mean, that is a lot of analysts believe that is why the ERA ultimately, failed to pass in time, was because of abortion. And it's, folks in the political realm discovered that, however sincere proponents or opponents may be, it also happens to be a wedge issue. There are single issue voters who, will vote one way, one party ticket based on that issue alone. So it's significant. It's a significant piece of history. I see another question about the Supreme Court if they overturn Roe this summer, and I think we're all really wondering what's going to happen. What do we here think is going to happen on, for the parties, our political parties? How is that going to shake out? Well, if Roe is struck down, and of course there are, particular legal issues with exactly how the ruling is crafted. But basically it'll go back to state by state. I actually don't know if it will be that different. It'll be a seismic event, certainly, and it'll be an emotional blow, I think, to a lot of people. But politically, it's hard to predict how that will shake out. I do think it's going to be sobering, the number of folks who will turn to underground abortion care. But I'll stop there and let our other folks weigh in. What do you think? Does the abortion issue disappear if Roe gets struck down, or are we just going to keep having this argument?
So I think in terms of what I'm hearing, California and Colorado are ramping up support for folks that need to travel for abortion care. And so I think there's that piece of it. I'm not sure about New Mexico, but I know I have heard of Colorado and California working on that piece. But the other thing is, and Jody and Alexis, I'd like to know what you think as well. I had a sincere email saying, now if Roe is overturned, they've got, they took care of abortion. Will their next thing be birth control? Will they then come after birth control? And while I think if I say that, it sounds hysterical, like I'm just, how could I be? But when I was talking about Roe v. Wade being overturned after the election in 2016, people thought I was hysterical. And that's exactly where we got and what I thought would happen. So, I don't know if the next step is birth control, but, Arizona puts not a single general fund dollar into family planning services. They fund Medicaid to do family planning in terms of in the primary care type of setting, but they don't put any additional dollars into that. And they don't put any state dollars in medically accurate sex ed. They put it into abstinence only, or what they're now calling sexual risk avoidance. So, I just don't see Arizona changing that dramatically unless there's some dramatic turns in terms of our executive and our leadership.
I agree completely. In a very related note, and I'm sorry, did Alexis, Penny, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
I just want us to keep some of these questions going. We're getting some stuff in the chat too. So the next one leads into the discussion you're having, and maybe kind of complicated, and also the one after that. So if you could lead those, so it'll be great.
Sure, we have great questions in the chat, actually. One is, why do those against reproductive choice, it seems like they don't care about children once they're actually born. I think we've observed that. They don't increase Medicaid or welfare payments. When this person have arguments for reproductive rights, they're told that women need to be punished for having premarital sex or having sex at all. Yeah, I think this is, what is happening at the legislature is reflective of a very narrow view, right? We just said it's not the majority of Arizonans, but we all understand we have, some extremists in our legislature because of districting and primaries and all of that. But yeah, it's resulted in this situation. I do think that could be one silver lining. Like if Roe is seriously damaged or struck down or something, I do think we can start to call people on this even more. Like, fine, you won, you got your way, congratulations. Now can we do something for these kids that you're creating, in a sense? I think that we're going to be challenged because we've made these arguments before, but we just have to make a more compelling case. Penny.
On that same question, Jody, I wonder if you, Anne Bree, and Alexis could speak about, there's a generation that seems to be far more, aware in looking down at how damaging the damage to Roe versus Wade is, but the younger generation of women who've actually, had the freedom to make so many choices. What is the work that needs to be done to really engage them to understand that the life they knew is going to be so seriously impacted because they are more promiscuous, they have more choices in how they build relationships and, work through their relationships. Just could you speak on that, please?
Sure, I'll just say a couple of things. It's funny, we've dealt with this this generational issue. We deal with it a little bit in our coalition. I would say the folks who are advocating on this issue, and Penny, I know you're talking about a big generational, like what do everyday young women think about this? Do they understand that they're about to lose a fundamental right? I think those of us our age worry about this a lot. We think like the kids don't understand. In our coalition, which is much less white, much younger than those of us on this call, or certainly Bree and I, right? They want to advocate on this stuff differently. They have an equity lens. We're much more diverse in our coalition even than 5 years ago. These folks are interested in reproductive justice, which is way more of a 360 view of the things we're talking about. Like you should be able to have a child if you want to have a child, or not have a child if you don't want to have a child. And society needs to be constructed so that we support equally each decision. So even the folks that are super engaged, like they have a different view and they want to approach this a little bit differently. And I do think us older folks are going to be challenged in a good way to stretch and grow and think about how we talk about all this stuff. I do think, though, it is going to just be a splash of cold water. I know a lot of us have daughters. I have a 28-year-old, and it just, unless you've lived through something dreadful, like having a fundamental right stripped away, I don't think you really realize what it's like. But Free, what do you think about all this?
Well, I kind of think people thought we were hysterical in 2016. I don't think people thought that this is where we would end up. I think they thought the courts would always protect us, and they thought that we would always have this right. While I completely agree with you in terms of the coalition and looking at it through a different lens, my daughter's a Gen Z. She's 19 next week. They have a very different view of this. And I think it will be a fundamental shift if Roe v. Wade is overturned now. You know, my daughter's 19. I just kind of think hell hath no fury is kind of what I'm thinking. The Gen Z they have a whole different mindset around this, and I love it, and I'm ready for it. I'm like, yeah.
They're ready to rock.
We'll see.
Huh?
Yeah.
Jody and Bree, if I might introduce another element to this, if you don't mind, in the same topic, we're talking about, you know, hell hath no fury on the women's side, but I wonder if you could also talk about men and their freedom to engage in relationships differently, and their consequences and responsibilities, and whether they're also, you know, are there the younger generation men that could also be mobilized? You know, can the hell hath no fury be by generation rather than by gender?
Well, I am so impressed by the generations that follow us, particularly with regard to gender roles and just, you know, understanding and accepting all kinds of different people. I mean, we really turned a corner quickly in our society. And I think it was because young people got it. Like, they don't want people to be mean to their gay friends. They want their trans friends to be okay in school. I think young men have a lot of alternative models of masculinity than existed even 10 or 15 years ago. And we talk about so much more now. So I do think, I think probably people our age can't even quite conceive how this is all going to look, but I am optimistic across genders that, you know, across the board, not just on abortion rights, but childcare, parental leave, you know, all of this stuff. I think men and women, these younger folks who are raising families, and it takes both of them, there's going to be much more of a team mentality and not just this walled off, you know, domestic sphere that women have to deal with, and it's their problem, and, you know, men have this other thing. So that certainly would be healthier. All of this is going to be a tough slog to move through as a society.
Jody, Alexis has a question.
I do. I just wanted to piggyback on that. And I think that of the people who were on the call, I know that we have veteran league members and new members like myself, but I think also on the call, we have people who are new to the league, and by way of understanding the power of the league. I think what we're talking about is connecting all of us who are busy with our everyday lives with the knowledge of what's actually happening at the Capitol. Me going to my first 2 hearings at the legislature after living here for 15 years, that's enough to incense someone. And hearing the disconnect between the values as they're spoken. We've had messages in the chat about separation of church and state. We've had messages in the chat about caring about these the babies that we are saying are mandatory pregnancies that must be carried out, what happens next? When you hear that, and then you're also getting information that's being decoded by the smart people like Jody and Bree and Penny. When we hear that and we are told specifically how we can be empowered, I think that's where we start to turn the tide. And when you overlay our massive membership that's growing and the reputation of the league that has been in existence for 100 years. And as in Phoenix, we all start to pay more attention to what's happening at the legislature. I think that legislators will hear from us and will hopefully be more accountable, because you're right. The demographic, when you look at some of those panels, does not represent the demographic of the folks who are registered to vote and who the league is doing such a great job of reaching out to and making sure they do have access to the ballot box. So I feel like that's inspiring to me as a new member, looking at what the league is doing. And I think it's really operationally impressive. It's not just speaking and liking something on social media. It's saying, all right, here's how you do it. Here's how you show up. And here's how you make your voice heard, which I think matters.
May
Well
I
stated.
add, Jody and Alexis, can you dig a little deeper? We have about 5 minutes, and I want to address these two questions in the chat because they're complex, but I think they're deep questions. And one is the one about separation of church and state, and then the second one is about the HB 2507, because it does have an intersection to the issue we're talking about. Could you take those two, please?
Sure. And I'm so glad that somebody brought up 2507, because it is a really insidious bill. And, it doesn't have abortion written all over it. It's actually so much worse than just an abortion bill. What 2507 wants to do, this bill that is moving its way through the legislature right now, is provide blanket liability, or a blanket waiver of liability from religious organizations, which it doesn't define, from any liability, during an emergency, and even that is in question. And what the bill purports to do in the wake of COVID is declare religious organizations essential services who can operate and not have any liability. The bill is poorly drafted. The sponsor, Toma, insists that he just wants people to be able to go to church during COVID or another pandemic, but it's not drafted that way. It is just this huge gaping hole that you could, drive a truck through, for religious organizations to be exempted from liability for all sorts of things. We've had the ACLU and a number of, really serious legal folks look at this, so it's not hysterical. It's a dangerous piece of legislation. And then the separation of church and state, which is a related issue, I wholeheartedly agree. The finer points of that are tough to press, and that's why you haven't seen this argument used really in the last 30 years. So one of the other organizations I work for is the National Council for Jewish Women, and they have relationships with a whole set of rabbis who did a friend of the court brief in one of our cases. And, they wanted to use this argument, the separation of church and state, a religious argument, because in many forms of Judaism, life does not begin till birth. So, these abortion restrictions are completely inconsistent with their religious view. It's sort of a non-starter argument legally. It's very hard to sustain for reasons that it would take me another hour to explain. But just the whole belief system in religion and having a hard time defining that, it's not a viable path, unfortunately. It seems like it would be because it's, one group of people imposing a set of beliefs on the whole nation. But it's not as clean as that to use that argument. So I think we're going to be having all sorts of arguments, no matter what the Supreme Court does for a while.
So Jody, I want to ask Bree this question. I want to phrase it a little differently than the way it's in the Q&A and actually speak to, I think we're all recognizing that the so-called pro-life don't seem to be about life itself, okay? And so the question is, moving forward, and this would be important for the league, what is the kinds of messaging and both to the public as an advocacy action in terms of lighting their fire to understand that life ought to mean life after it's born and everything that's needed to support life after it's born. And so, it would be helpful to sort of delve into that. Alexis, maybe this is something the issue team can work on, is what kind of messaging do we send out to the public to educate them about, if you are about pro-life. Can you speak to that, Bree, how that could be leveraged, if you will?
We haven't been very successful thus far, I guess it would be one thing I would say. This was really, and I saw it in the chat as well, called upon, I believe in the early 80s, to be a rallying cry for the Republican Party. They kind of chose to take this on as a way to galvanize folks to their side of the argument and their political party. And in that process, they were able to, for political expediency, endorse people that would just say, yes, I am. They didn't probably really think about that topic as much. And so I think what we need to do is we need to talk more about, the cost of a family, how much, what do you need? And if we aren't going to provide assistance for those that might be working paycheck to paycheck, or, even just, minimum wage jobs, 2 or 3 of them, what can we do? Childcare, I think what the pandemic has done is showed us childcare is vulnerable in terms of availability and cost for everyone, not just for those that have less resources. So I think, I don't have an answer to that, because if I had an answer to that, we'd be doing it. But I think it's just been messaging that's been hard to develop that resonates with 4 and 5 generations of folks that are voting and are working on these issues. Alexis and Jody might have a better answer.
Bree, but I want to ask this a little differently, not for the people who are already bought into that pro-life Kool-Aid, if you will, okay? But the people who need to, the people who, it's really, we've got a whole generation coming in, as you said, Jody, from the equity lens, that need to, that could, what can we do to mobilize? Let's put it this way, not necessarily the folks who've drunk the Kool-Aid, but, really everybody else to understand, what does this mean when, we don't provide all of this, what does pro-life mean in a true sense, if you will? Does that make sense what I'm asking? We may not have won it with that group, but that's not who I'm thinking of targeting, because that's the Phyllis Schlafly movement and that group. And that's a generation shift. How do we bring the new generation to understand how that pro-life moniker is such a lie, if you will, okay? That's really what I'm looking at, asking for.
I think these generations coming up are so sensible. And one of the things that they understand, it's why we invited Bree, because what her agency does is so critical. Birth control, access to birth control, right? If you are anti-abortion, let's just say, and I agree with the person in the chat who said, stop using their language and calling them pro-life. You're absolutely right. The anti-abortion folks, right, it's a wedge issue. It's political at the highest levels. There are everyday people who have very sincere beliefs, and I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the operatives. But access to birth control has not been part of the pro-life or anti-abortion movement. And the hypocrisy there is staggering to me. And we have some real life data. I've been banging this drum forever. Bree's going to roll her eyes, but in Colorado, they made all the best forms, even the really expensive ones, of birth control available to everyone. And they saw a 40% drop in unplanned pregnancies. I mean, that's everybody wins. Kathy Herod should be championing that. And I think that is what, that's when you know that it's not really about kids and families and life, it's political. But I think we can get the sincere folks on our side who say, you know what, it's all about families, and families should be able to make their own decisions. And being able to control when you start your family puts you in the driver's seat of your own life. It's one of the most powerful things there is. So.
And I think it's back to the message, another message from the chat was talking about engaging the voting populace, making sure that people are plugged into, the Arizona legislature. It can be confusing and it can be boring. So we need to somehow decode it. And here's the top line, what really matters. And I know tons of smart, engaged people who are like, wait, what is it again? I have 1 senator and 2 representatives. What's my legislative district? Because it's a lot and it's a moving target. So I think that it's back again to boiling it down to what really matters. And then the League of Women Voters, or wherever people are, whatever coalition they're choosing to be a part of, to pay attention to the most important things so that legislators can hear from their constituents who are voting and who can vote them out of office. Because if the percentages are there on issues that matter like this, they just need to hear from us.
Alexis, Jody, and Bree, we are about a minute to our end time. I want to thank you all for this really robust, energized conversation. Thank you for giving us the time, sharing your expertise. We're very grateful for the time you've given us, and very grateful to our 45 attendees who joined us on this call, which is wonderful. Bree, we are grateful for you joining the League and amplifying and helping us understand. Jody, of course, you are providing great leadership, and so is Alexis. And Alexis, thank you for reminding all the attendees that we at the League are taking this issue seriously, and there's a wonderful way for folks to plug in. Thank you everyone for joining us in the call. We wish you a wonderful rest of the day and whatever you have planned in front of you. Please do join us tomorrow. We'll be talking about another very important issue and one of great concern to the League on criminal justice reform. Do join us tomorrow, and we look forward to seeing you all. Thank you, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much.
Jody, Gittel, and Alexis, if you could stay on for just a second, please.
Bye, everyone.
Gittel, I will download the recording and put it up there as soon as we end the call. I'm going to start